When I just finished college, I was living in a one-bedroom townhouse/split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at that time I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said he had a good job, nice teeth, don't judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date we said bye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled out the exit I noticed he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breath, and decided, okay, screw it, I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway, and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered, and was getting ready for bed, and I started feeling dumb because was that really him? Am I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination. Or so I thought. I decided I was going to message him and just say, had a good time, good night. And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through to my phone of a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest. I started shaking. I didn't know what to say. And he texts me and says, I didn't know you lived across the street from me. I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him. There's a huge apartment complex kitty corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived, I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, just standing there outside like he was waiting for me. I opened the door and he asked if he could come in, and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him I was exhausted, and I'd rather just crash out as it had been a long day. The next morning I woke up to go to work, and my windshield had been smashed. My car was keyed, my back 2 tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees, and is like, oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee. So again I'm freaked out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, don't get in that car. So I called my boss, told them the situation, and explained I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time, BTW. When the police finally got there, this guy was acting really suspicious. He walked away and was hiding on the other side of his car. I filed the report. The police basically said, hope you have insurance, and we're on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cops' lights turn on, and the cops scream, freeze, put your hands in the air, and get down on your knees. I look, and the cops got his gun drawn at this guy, and this dude's on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with the cop after he got into the back, and he explained he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shook. It took me a couple days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done work. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment on another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move it to my new place because I was so scared this dude would follow them while moving. So that's my horror story of the first time I used Plenty of Fish. I know. Why did I meet up with someone I had only met online? Any stereotypical reason you can think of, probably. I'm lame, a loser, unattractive, dumb, naive, etc., etc. Probably a mixture of them all, but needless to say, against my best judgment I did. I had just been dumped by my longtime boyfriend/fiancé of 6 years. We also had a young son, so needless to say I was devastated. So a few months later I was browsing around on Facebook, and I got a friend request from a guy I, of course, didn't know, but he lived close by and was handsome, so why not? I accepted. Almost immediately he messaged me, and we start chatting because I was lonely, and he seemed very nice. I never got any strange vibes from him during our conversations online, so our Facebook chats transitioned to phone calls, and then eventually I very hesitantly agreed to meet him for a date after talking for about a month. We met at a local restaurant for our first date and had a great time. He was very charming and quite attractive, so I was drawn in. He was very respectful and was not pushy at all. I did give him a quick little kiss at the end of the date, but that was it, and we called it a night and went our separate ways. We talked again that night on the phone and decided to go out again. Our second date was dinner and a movie, and was equally nice, and again he was respectful, but I could tell he wanted a little more. I didn't give in though, and we said our goodbyes and went home. Now we agreed upon a third date because I really liked this guy. Maybe it was because I was rebounding. I don't know, but I legitimately enjoyed his company. We met for dinner again, and when the end of the date came around, neither of us wanted to part, and I wasn't ready for him to see where I live or vice versa, so I agreed to go ride around town with him. We ended up driving up to the beautiful lake that was in my town. Of course, we find a very secluded and dark spot and parked. One thing led to another, yada yada yada, you know. Well, afterward, we were just sitting there in the front of his Cherokee and talked for a little bit, and then I said I should probably be getting home. So when we backed out of our spot, the car was facing the lake at an area that the pavement goes down into the water, so trucks can back in and unload boats. He put the car in drive and looked over at me admirably for a brief second, and I kid you not, this is exactly what he said. Well, I got what I wanted, now I'm ready to go. I had no time to even process what he was saying before he was flooring it right towards the lake. I didn't even have time to think, but instinct kicked in, and I had my seatbelt unhooked and my hand on the door handle to get ready to jump the heck out of there. I was in the process of pulling the handle when he slowed down and was just laughing hysterically. I just turned and looked at him with my eyes wide as saucers and my heart jumping out of my chest. He said, "I was just trying to scare you." I could not even speak another word the rest of the way to my car. I know you are all thinking that was the end of that relationship, but unfortunately no. I, against my better judgment, dated the guy for about 4 months after that, and more creepy psycho things happened. But I will save that for another day. So, moral of this story, please don't meet people from the internet that you don't know. So I've just started going out again since COVID restrictions lifted and managed to go out on a date last night. After dinner, we both decided to go out to a bar. I am a lesbian and she is pansexual, so we decided to go to a gay bar as there's usually a nice vibe. We don't have to worry about getting intimate, and there's usually a lot less creepy men. We sat down in an outside section, and 2 girls from a table over decided to come over and sit with us. They were both smoking, which I don't have an issue with, but my first red flag was the girl who sat next to me immediately started blowing smoke in my face. She was tatted up but honestly looked about 14, and it was clear she was trying to throw off some tough exterior. She, completely unprompted, began telling us the following. She was a dominatrix, how much money was coming into her bank account, and handed my date her card to buy drinks with. That she drove a car and had a motorbike, pointed to a car on the street that was supposedly hers, despite drinking and therefore cannot drive, and in our city overnight parking on the street isn't an option. That during recent extreme flash flooding which sent entire towns underwater at 15 meters in some places, she just drove through it on a motorbike. These things, while small, immediately began ringing alarm bells in my head, as I know exactly the type of person to mention things like that unprompted. I've dated a few, and they've been bad news, and it's usually all bullshit. To start, no one with a substantial amount of money is handing their debit card out to strangers to leave and go to the bar with. At some point, she began to make comments on my sexual experience. I don't generally sleep around, as it's not my thing, so my body count can be counted on 2 hands. She went into depth about sex and how I don't know the ins and out of it because of my low body count. She went down to detail of the different tastes she's experienced. I will say I have no idea why I gave her that information, but I was a bit drunk and tend to be more honest inebriated. I was obviously unimpressed by her bullshit. Her demeanor was so disrespectful. She had an argument with another girl saying that there's no way she could be bi because she was wearing a cardigan. She began asking my date and I about our sexualities, if we're single, putting her hand on our backs to bring us closer to her. At this point, I messaged my fake husband to tell him I'll be giving her his number/socials, or will need him to call me if I need an out. The absolute creepiest thing was when she picked up a straw and tried to put it in my drink. I slapped my hand over it, because no matter what the intentions are there, it's not happening. Drug or COVID, I don't care. Keep that shit away from me. By far the creepiest, grossest experience, and probably the biggest alarm bells I've ever gotten in such a short time from a stranger. I literally just made this profile for the purposes of typing this story out. I look to gain nothing from it. All I really want to do is raise awareness of some of the creepy things that go on. I see far too many dating app horror stories. I'm 23F. I've been single for a while. I go out on dates very rarely, but I just recently moved to a new city. I've been struggling with loneliness from not knowing anyone, and I don't have any real friends from work yet, so I took to things like Bumble and Tinder. After maybe a week or swiping, I eventually came across a guy that I matched with. He was really cute, had a good job, had similar interests as me, and was the same age. Should have known better. We talked for about a week. After a couple of days, we exchanged numbers. We talked about life. We talked about our jobs. He was really sweet. He gave me assurance and told me that a new move could be scary, but that putting myself out there was a good step in the right direction. He did get strange with me at one point and asked me things like what color bra and underwear I was wearing. I told him I wasn't quite ready to talk like that. He agreed it was out of line and apologized. Didn't think much else of it. After about a week, he wanted to meet up in person. He wanted it to be in a public place so that I would feel safe. He told me he would take me to dinner, and if I wanted after we could grab a beer. It sounded like a fun night to me. He wanted to meet outside of a dive shop, which I thought was a little strange. It's winter where we are, but it's one of these US states that doesn't really see cold winters, so I didn't give it a great amount of thought. The shop is located near a public park, so there were a good amount of people there. After looking around for a bit, I spotted him talking to some people. I walked up to him and gave him a hug. Not like super romantic, but more than a platonic, less than a partner kind of hug. To my disappointment, he just sort of aced his palms on my back like he was put off. But he did give me a slight smile and a "how are you?" I tried making it work. I told him he looked a lot cuter on person, and that I was happy that he asked me out. I was extremely nervous. His eyes widened, and he turned to ask the group he was previously talking to who put me up to it. With no expression of humor, they all just calmly denied anything. He then asked me who told me to do this. I was confused. I told him that we had been talking on Tinder. He told me he didn't have Tinder, and even went as far as showing me that he didn't have it downloaded. He apologized for the mix-up. I showed him the profile, and he seemed equally confused. I turned away and started walking back to my car. I was so humiliated. Then I got a text message from the number I had been talking to that SI ply read. Ha 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 ha. I could not even fathom that. I attempted to call the number, but it had been disconnected. By the time I got home, the profile had been deleted. I blocked the number just in case. I had some of the photos saved that the profile sent me. I did a reverse image search on Google and found the Facebook profile of the guy that I actually met. His name wasn't the same, and he was actually a few years older. I also figured out he was a dive instructor at the shop. I felt so betrayed and violated. I did send the guy a message, the actual one, and apologized for the inconvenience. I explained everything to him and why I was acting that way. I gave him as much of the story as I found necessary. To my surprise, he actually responded back and said he was sorry and that he was blindsided by the encounter. He did offer to take me out for a drink to make up for the mess, but I simply have severe trust issues now. I'll share this one on behalf of my roommate and best friend, because honestly, it's a story that deserves to live on in infamy. It's the kind of tale you tell at parties when someone mentions awkward house guest stories, and everyone's jaw drops because nothing could possibly top this. Except it's real, and it happened to us. So, my best friend met this guy while bartending. She worked at one of those busy, touristy bars where the music is loud, the drinks flow endlessly, and random encounters are practically guaranteed. She loved the job, not just for the money, but for the stories. And this particular night, she got a story that would haunt us both for years. The guy was from another country. I don't remember exactly where, but it's not important. What mattered was that they hit it off. He was charming, funny, and apparently attractive enough for her to overlook the fact that he was just another passing tourist. After her shift, they kept talking, laughing, and flirting, and one thing led to another. She decided to bring him home. Now, I didn't meet him that night. I was already fast asleep in my room. For context, we lived in a small apartment with a Jack and Jill bathroom setup. If you're unfamiliar, it means we each had our own sinks in our respective rooms, but shared a single shower and toilet that connected both sides. It was a functional arrangement most of the time, except when one of us brought home a guest. That night, my best friend's guest became my problem. Apparently, at some point after they got home, he needed to relieve himself. And by relieve himself, I mean he unleashed an absolute flood of epic proportions. I don't know if he was drunk, half asleep, or just catastrophically bad at aiming, but the result was pure chaos. He didn't just miss the toilet. No, that would have been too simple. Instead, he managed to turn our bathroom into a splash zone. The floor was wet. The walls were wet. The toilet itself was wet. It was as if a sprinkler system had gone off, except the liquid was not water. But of course, I didn't know any of this when I got up at 4 a.m. to get ready for work. All I knew was that I was half asleep, stumbling into the bathroom in the dark, ready to pee before my long shift. The moment I sat down, though, something felt off. Something cold. Something wet. I froze. My brain struggled to process what was happening. Was the toilet seat wet? No, it couldn't be. I reached for the light switch, flicked it on, and immediately wished I hadn't. It was everywhere. I mean everywhere. The floor, the walls, the toilet, the seat. I don't know how one human being could produce that much liquid, or how they managed to distribute it so evenly, but there it was. It looked like he'd performed some kind of drunken, abstract art installation, using urine as his medium and our bathroom as his canvas. I screamed. I mean really screamed. The kind of scream that wakes people up in a panic. My best friend, bless her, came rushing to the door on her side of the bathroom, still half asleep and disoriented. She opened it, and I let her have it. Your guy peed everywhere. I yelled, gesturing wildly to the crime scene. It's on the walls. The floor. The seat. I sat in it. She blinked at me, her brain clearly struggling to keep up. Then slowly the horror dawned on her. She glanced at the bathroom, then back at me, and said the only thing she could think of, "Oh my God. I'm so sorry." Sorry? Sorry. I was not my best self at that moment. You need to clean this up. Right now. Both of you. I slammed the door shut and jumped in the shower, trying to scrub away the memory of what had just happened. As I stood under the scalding water, I could hear her on the other side, trying to rouse her guest. But he wasn't having it. Apparently, he was still fast asleep, or pretending to be, because let's be honest, no one wants to deal with that kind of mess at 4 a.m. To her credit, my best friend didn't leave me hanging. While her guy continued snoozing away in blissful ignorance, she got on her hands and knees and started cleaning up the disaster he'd left behind. I could hear her muttering under her breath as she scrubbed the floor, the walls, the toilet. Meanwhile, I was fuming. The audacity of this man. To turn our bathroom into a swamp and then just sleep through it? Unacceptable. When I finished my shower and stepped back into my room, my best friend was still cleaning. Her guest, however, hadn't moved an inch. He was still sprawled out in her bed, completely oblivious to the chaos he'd caused. That's when I snapped. I stormed into the kitchen, grabbed his shoes, some hideous sneakers that were already an offense to fashion, and marched out to the back balcony. Without a second thought, I hurled them into the yard below. I didn't care where they landed. For all I knew, a stray dog could have carried them off, and I wouldn't have lost a wink of sleep over it. When my best friend finally finished cleaning, she came into my room, looking equal parts exhausted and apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I'll deal with him in the morning." "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my temper. "I will be. But he's never setting foot in this apartment again." She nodded. "Agreed." The next morning, her guest woke up none the wiser. He eventually noticed his shoes were missing and asked where they were. My best friend, without missing a beat, told him, "Oh, they had an accident. You might want to check the yard." He left shortly after that, and we never saw him again. To this day, we still laugh about it, though at the time, it felt more like a nightmare than a comedy. It's one of those stories we tell when people ask about our worst houseguest experiences, and it never fails to get a reaction. I wasn't my best self that night, but honestly, neither was he. I was 14 at the time of the incident. I was home with my brother, grandma, and my baby cousin. My brother had invited some girl over. Please remember that part, because it is key to the story. My brother then introduced us to the girl. She looked normal but seemed a bit nervous. My grandma asked her some questions and told her if her and my brother needed anything to let her know. Anyways, my grandma told me to stay upstairs and allow my brother and the girl privacy downstairs. Of course, me being the nosy little sister, I wanted to know everything, especially this new girl my brother brought home, that I snuck down the hall quietly and looked over the banister. I saw the girl looking outside the backyard and asking my brother questions like, "Who all live here? Is this you guys' house? It's so nice." Hearing the conversation, I decided to listen to my grandma and go back inside my room. I began to listen to music and felt the urge to look outside my window. I then saw a 2000 Chevrolet Impala parked outside our driveway. The door was wide open, and it appeared to be a man leaving our home with all of our tech items from our home and packing it inside the car. The feeling of dread came. "Yo, what is going on?" I said. Then the sound of loud talking was heard downstairs, and my brother said, "Please, you don't have to do this. Just let us leave if you know what's best," the girl responded. I hurried and ran to my grandma quietly as I can to let her know what I saw downstairs and what I heard. She didn't understand the severity of what I was telling her and began to laugh, which made me kind of upset because our life could be in danger. I heard tires screech and saw the Chevrolet Impala speed down the street. I called out to my brother, and he said, "Huh," in a distraught voice. "What's going on? Who is that man outside?" I asked. He didn't reply. I walked downstairs and saw my brother shaking his head in disbelief, looking at where our TV used to be. The police came shortly due to my grandma calling them. We were later informed that my brother and the girl met for the first time that day, off a dating app. And of course they met at our home. The girl of course set up the entire robbery. She was just the decoy until her boyfriend came to rob us. But this part I'm about to say makes my blood run cold. The guy who robbed us held my brother at knife point and said if he didn't comply he would stab all of us upstairs as a punishment for him getting in the way. The cops asked my brother to give him a description, but he didn't. Later on the same day, we then heard a truck park on the side of the house. Whoever was in it yelled and threw a glass bottle down and drove off. I'm not sure if it was the same man who robbed us, but it terrified me nevertheless. I'm grateful nothing happened to my brother though, or my family. It goes to show you that you can't trust everyone. It started as all good first dates do, with weeks of build-up. We worked together, which added a layer of complexity to the whole situation, but also made it undeniably exciting. For weeks, we'd been shamelessly flirting in that way you do when you're trying to gauge if someone likes you back without being too obvious. Every shared glance, every witty comment, it all built up to this moment. Finally, one day, she casually suggested we hang out. "Outside of work, I mean," she said, her tone deliberately nonchalant, but her eyes giving her away. I tried to play it cool, but internally I was already planning the date. We set it for the weekend, and she offered to drive. Everything felt easy and natural, the way it does when you just know the chemistry is there. The date itself was perfect. It wasn't one of those stiff, awkward affairs where you're both nervously trying to fill the silence. No, this was one of those rare dates where the conversation just flowed effortlessly, like we'd known each other forever. We talked about everything, our favorite books, childhood memories, the stupidest things we'd ever done. She had this way of laughing that made me want to say something funny just to hear it again. We spent hours hopping between spots, dinner, dessert, a walk through a quiet park. Every stop felt like an extension of the last, like neither of us wanted the night to end. Time slipped away without us noticing, and before we knew it, we were sitting in her car in front of my house. It was late, but neither of us wanted to leave. The conversation was still going strong, and it felt like if we kept talking, the night could stretch on forever. I remember how the streetlights cast a soft glow inside the car, highlighting her smile and the way she'd twist a strand of hair around her finger when she was deep in thought. We weren't just having a conversation. We were in our own little world, completely wrapped up in each other. But, of course, reality has a way of sneaking in. We both had a work meeting the next morning, and as much as I didn't want the night to end, I knew I had to get some sleep. Reluctantly, I said, "Well, I should probably head in. Early morning and all." She smiled, though there was a hint of hesitation in it. "Yeah, I get it," she said softly. "It's late." I reached for the door handle, still feeling the warmth of the night between us. As I opened the door, I turned back and said, "See you tomorrow." And that's when it happened. She looked at me, her cheeks slightly flushed, and said in the sweetest, most vulnerable voice, "I can't wait that long." For a split second, her words hung in the air, and I had a chance to understand what she meant. But did I? No, of course not. I was already halfway out of the car, my mind focused on getting inside and collapsing into bed. Without thinking, without processing her tone, her expression, or the courage it must have taken to say those words, I replied, "Well, you're gonna have to." And then I slammed the car door. I still remember the sound of that door closing, echoing in the quiet street. As I walked up to my house, I felt this faint nagging sensation, like I'd missed something important. But I brushed it off. The date had gone great, hadn't it? We'd had fun, we'd connected, and we were going to see each other at work tomorrow. Everything was fine. It wasn't until the next morning that the realization hit me, like a freight train. I was sitting in the meeting, sipping my coffee and trying to stay awake, when she walked in. She gave me a polite smile, but it wasn't the same as before. There was a subtle shift, a coolness that hadn't been there the night before. And that's when it clicked. Her words replayed in my mind. I can't wait that long. She wasn't talking about the meeting. She wasn't just saying goodnight. She was hinting, making herself vulnerable, letting me know she wanted to stay in that moment with me a little longer. And what had I done? I'd told her she'd have to wait. Like some clueless idiot, I'd taken her words at face value and shut the door, literally, on what could have been a perfect ending to a perfect night. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. How had I missed something so obvious? And worse, how had I made it so much worse with my reply? Well, you're gonna have to. I cringed just thinking about it. After the meeting, I caught up with her in the hallway, desperate to salvage the situation. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual, even though I felt anything but. About last night. She raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. What about it? I scratched the back of my neck, suddenly unsure how to phrase what I wanted to say. I think I might have misunderstood something you said. Her lips twitched, like she was holding back a smile. Oh, yeah. When you said you couldn't wait that long, I trailed off, feeling the heat rise to my face. I didn't get what you meant until later. Like much later. And I think I might have responded poorly. At that, she laughed, soft at first, then louder, until she was clutching her sides. Oh my God, she said between laughs. You just realized? I nodded sheepishly. I feel like an idiot. Well, you kind of are, she said, still laughing. But you're a cute idiot. That broke the tension, and we ended up laughing together. She teased me about it for weeks after that, but eventually, it became one of those stories we'd tell over and over, always ending in laughter. Years later, when we told the story at our wedding, she made sure to emphasize the part where I slammed the car door in her face. He had no idea I was flirting, she told the guests, shaking her head. I was practically throwing myself at him, and he just said, "Well, you're gonna have to." Like it was nothing. And yet, here we are, I said, grinning at her. I guess I did something right. Wrong. I apologize in advance for the face that I'm posting this from my phone. So this happened a few weeks back. As I'm sure most of you know, Facebook now has a dating component to it. I matched with this guy who seemed pretty chill. He was older than me. His profile stated he was 27, and I just turned 23. But in my mind, 4 years age difference isn't that big of a deal. We talked for a day or two, and decided that we would meet up for a drink to get a feel for each other in person. When we met face to face, he looked older than just 27. He had quite a bit of gray mixed into his facial hair, but I figured he might just be one of those people whose hair turns gray earlier in life, NBD. We have a few drinks and chatted for a bit. He again states that he is 27. He was nice, but he wouldn't stop staring at me and was feeding my compliments with every other sentence that came out of his mouth. I'm really awkward and pretty average looking. I was flattered he was saying those things, but naturally, it made me uncomfortable. I decided it was time for me to head out shortly after that since I had to be up for work at 4:30 a.m. the next day. He walked me to my car, and we started discussing his. It caught my attention due to the fact it was a 1970 Camaro. He then offered to take me for a drive in it. At 10 p.m., I declined due to the time and to the fact I had only known him less than 2 hours, and he wants me to get in his car and go on a random drive late at night. That wasn't going to happen. I really enjoy watching documentaries about serial killers, reading creepy encounters and L&M stories. The last thing I'm about to do is get into a vehicle with an unfamiliar man who will take me to God knows where. I know what kind of danger that can subject a person to. He was very persistent about it, but I wouldn't budge, so I got in my car and left for my drive home, which was about 45 minutes long. By the time I got home, I received multiple texts from him, probably at least 15. Most of those texts stating how much he already missed me, wants to build a future with me, how he's never fallen this fast for everyone his 38 years of life, continuing with further compliments, etc. That's when my stomach dropped. He just stated he was 38 years old. That's not what I was told at the bar or what his profile said. I replied to him, inquiring whether or not it bothered him that he was 15 years older than I was. It bothered me, that's for damn sure. He states that it didn't, and that he prefers to date younger women around my age. I didn't respond and just went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I had multiple texts and 5 missed calls / voicemails from that dude. Not going to lie, I straight up ghosted him and blocked him on every form of social media I had, as well as his phone number, which is a real asshole thing to do on my part, but he really creeped me out. He was super charming, but way too pushy, and was giving me some Ted Bundy vibes. So shout out to Facebook for introducing me to the creepiest person I've ever gone on a date with. I'm going to tell you about my dating experience with a government agent. Or was he? Not only will this post focus on bizarre events, but also what the relationship was like. I haven't been able to understand what happened, and I feel like I need more insight, so that's why I'm doing this. When I tell family and friends, they are just as puzzled. I'm a 23-year-old gay guy. I'm from Michigan. I just deliver pizza and live at home with my parents. I have no affiliation with the government. A few years ago, I met an older guy online. He was here in Michigan visiting friends from Washington, D.C. He was nice, and we decided to hang out after chatting for a little while. I wasn't looking for anything serious, so when we hung out it was casual. We would just have wine or get dinner. Sometimes alone, other times with his friends who live here in my area. The first thing that stuck out about him was when he told me what he does. He told me he works for a 3-letter agency, but he could not disclose which it was. All I knew was that his job is very demanding, and it was for some 3-letter agency in DC. Nothing felt weird at that point, until the magnet popped up. It's honestly hard to remember this in detail, so bear with me. I don't remember the first time seeing it, but I know that one day I noticed a small circular magnet just sitting by us. It looked like a metal washer, just a donut metal-shaped disc about the size of a pepperoni, but it was thick and shiny. I remember seeing a few of them around, and even being stacked on each other. I can only remember what it looked like. I didn't say much about it at first. I kept my mouth shut when it came to anything possibly involving his work. I regret that now because it makes me feel like I was being vulnerable and naive. I wanted to impress him by respecting the private nature of his job, but in my gut I knew it was connected to his work somehow. I didn't know it at the time, but that weird metal thing would come back in conversation later. As our relationship, if you can even call it that, it was more like a fling, went on, he started to show more of his personality me. I began to feel an energy of manipulation when I was with him, and I just felt intruded on. He was very sweet and doted on me, but it felt too good to be true. Tension began to rise very quickly because I wasn't giving him enough of my time, and I began pulling away. He was coming on too strong. It almost gave me a feeling of being captured. The more our strange dynamic played out, he began to tell me a little about work, slowly intertwining it with other aspects of his life. I don't remember why or when, but at some point he told me about the magnet. Hair's the best way I can explain this. Because of his job, he has foreign entities who literally try to mess with and interfere with his life. When you read that, you probably aren't completely understanding what I mean. Apparently there was some sort of foreign entity that would use advanced technology to send some sort of disrupting wave of energy to him to distort his thoughts and emotions. I don't know how severe this was, but apparently it was very hard for him to cope with. I had never heard of anything like this prior. Please share what you know if you're familiar with what I'm talking about. He told me the metal object's purpose was to block that interference from affecting us. This was a lot to digest. I didn't know what to think. WTF? Foreign entities using mind control on him? Now I'm going to make a list of the weirdest parts and why I still rack my brain about this encounter to this day. One day, the magnet was stuck to my phone. I pulled it off and ignored it. I never found out which agency he worked for, and I wonder if it was an illusion of grandeur looking back now. He had a friend in Florida who was a lady in probably her 60s. He told me he stayed with her during the pandemic. When he FaceTimed her one day, she picked up a small object with a screen on it and asked if it was his. When he said yes, she quickly hid it. Also, he had a lot of weird flashy technology I've never seen before. 3. If the foreign technology shit is real, did it affect me? Can it cause cancer face with tears of joy? 4. He ended up showing a very strange and manipulative side of himself, insisting I should have invited him to dinner with my family at Christmas, even though we had just met. 5. The one time we hung out in a hotel, he told me he was stepping out briefly and was gone for almost 4 hours. 6. He He told me his ex-boyfriend was found slaughtered after begging him not to go out one night, but the boyfriend insisted. He told me the name and said I could look it up, but at the time I regrettably just didn't for some reason. So I don't have the information about the incident or person. These 6 points creep me out when I look at them together, which I'm leaving open to your interpretation. The fling came to an end when I didn't give him enough of my time, and then he refused to see me again. His manipulative side became very visible when he would blow me off just to hit me with a "miss you" text. He became so manipulative after initially being so loving. Red flag? Thinking back to the last time I saw him, I'm glad I got out safe. We were at an Airbnb, and he started crying, but I didn't. It was so weird. He was the one crying, but then blew me off. When I asked why he was crying that night, it was because he felt so worried for what this would do to me. What was he thinking would happen to me? Probably just manipulation, but it just was really strange, and thinking back it felt like I was with a truly weird person, and I was not safe in that moment. Nothing bad happened, but my gut just tells me it wasn't right. I wonder what the magnet truly was, and why he wanted to make things serious so fast. I really am curious who that person was and his true intentions. So that's all I wanted to share. If you have had a similar experience or any questions, please let me know, and I'll be happy to respond. If you can help bring some understanding to the situation, that would be great, but I understand how loaded this post is. Also feel free to DM me. When I was about 25, I lived on the Toronto Islands, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a little slice of paradise right across the water from the city. Life there was peaceful, quiet, and full of moments that made you stop and appreciate how unique it was, like taking the ferry every time you wanted to go into the city. Sure, it wasn't the most convenient, but it added a bit of charm to daily life. One night, I was on the ferry heading into Toronto, and as I sat down, I noticed her. A woman sitting just a few seats away from me, and let me tell you, she was absolutely, undeniably, breathtakingly beautiful. I don't mean kind of pretty or cute in a certain light. I mean the kind of beautiful that makes you question if you've accidentally wandered into a movie, or if some casting director has snuck a supermodel onto your commuter ferry. She was that beautiful. She had this effortless elegance about her, the kind that feels unattainable. You know, the kind where even if you wore the exact same outfit, you'd still look like you got lost in a thrift store. I couldn't help but glance over at her, trying not to stare but failing miserably. I was 25, single, and already imagining how this could be one of those meet-cute stories people always talked about. As the ferry pulled into the city, the skies opened up, and it started pouring rain, because apparently, the universe decided this story needed a dramatic twist. I didn't have an umbrella, but I did have my car parked nearby, so I saw my moment. I gathered up my courage, walked over to her, and said something smooth like, "Hey, it's raining. Want a ride?" To my surprise and relief, she said yes. It was a short drive to her place, but it felt like the kind of ride you remember forever. She was funny, kind, and yes, still ridiculously beautiful. When we pulled up to her apartment, I figured that was the end of it, but just as she was about to get out of the car, she turned to me and said, "Hey, do you want to go out sometime?" My brain nearly short-circuited. Sure," I said, probably sounding a little too eager, but not caring in the slightest. She smiled, thanked me for the ride, and disappeared into her building. For the next week, I replayed that interaction over and over in my head, telling myself that I'd somehow managed to impress this stunning woman enough for her to ask me out. And then, like a dream come true, she called me. She suggested we go bowling, a bit of a curveball, no pun intended. But hey, who was I to question her? Did I mention she was beautiful? The night of the date arrived, and I showed up at the bowling alley near her place, equal parts excited and nervous. And there she was, waiting for me, just as stunning as I remembered. If anything, she looked even better. I was practically floating as we made small talk, got our shoes, and picked a lane. Everything seemed great. I felt like I'd hit the jackpot, until I made the mistake of asking her, "Hey, can I grab you a drink?" Her answer was casual, but unexpected. "Oh no," she said. "My religion doesn't allow me to drink." "Okay, no problem. Not a deal breaker." "No worries," I said. "How about a soft drink?" She shook her head. "I don't eat any sugar." "Ah," I said, my enthusiasm dipping ever so slightly. "Coffee?" "No, I don't drink caffeine." I paused, mentally running through my list of potential options. "Tea?" "Nope, no tea either." At this point, I was running out of ideas. "Water?" She smiled. "Just plain water, thanks." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. I mean, sure, she was beautiful, but the conversation was starting to feel less like a date and more like a dietary Q&A session. Still, I told myself to keep an open mind. Maybe this was just a quirky thing, and the rest of the evening would pick up. Spoiler alert, it didn't. As we bowled, I quickly learned that her strict dietary restrictions were just the tip of the iceberg. No meat, no fried foods, no late nights, no clubs, no movies with inappropriate content. I was starting to feel like I'd accidentally wandered into a lifestyle intervention rather than a date. And then came the kicker, the religion. "Hey Scott," she said, pausing between turns. "My church is a lot of fun. You should come with me on Sunday." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Thanks, but I'm not really the church-going type." "Oh, you'd love it," she insisted, her enthusiasm ramping up. "We have great community events, and the pastor is so inspiring. I think it could really change your life." The more she talked, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a passing suggestion. It was a full-blown sales pitch. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guy on a date. I was a potential recruit. As she rattled off the church's virtues, I found myself nodding politely while mentally calculating how much longer I had to endure this. By the time the date ended, I was practically vibrating with relief. I'd spent the entire evening trying to find some common ground, but it felt like every conversation was a dead end. She didn't drink, didn't eat most foods, didn't enjoy any of the things I did, and to top it all off, she was trying to convert me. As we walked to our cars, I plastered on a polite smile and said, "Well, this was fun. Yeah, we should do it again sometime," she said brightly. "Definitely," I lied, knowing full well that there was absolutely no chance of a second date. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted from the sheer effort of trying to make the date work. For a while, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how something that had started so promisingly could have gone so spectacularly wrong. To this day, I still think about that date every now and then, not because it was great, but because it was the perfect lesson in how appearances can be deceiving. She was, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful women I'd ever met. But sometimes, beauty isn't enough to carry a conversation, let alone a relationship. Never in my life have I been so relieved that a date was over. So about 7 years ago, I had an online date who, after I told him a second date wouldn't be happening, decided to show up at my place of work. Needless to say, after that I was extremely hesitant to dive back into the pool of online dating. In fact, since then I can count on one hand the number of men I've dated from online. But my sister and my best friend have both met men over the last year on an app that connects through Facebook. It's used to help filter out catfishes, and also tries to find mutual friends of friends that would match what you're looking for in a partner. So over the last month I've been talking to guys here and there, but hadn't yet really found one I was ready to move beyond text with. Then this guy came along. We chatted in the app, and he was really nice and seemed safe. After almost 3 weeks of daily texting, I agreed to a date. For the first time ever, I did not stalk his social media profiles because I wanted to stop self-sabotaging. I tend to dig so deep that I know too much before the date, and have already made my decision that there will be no second date. Yes, I am extremely paranoid. So I show up to the first date, and it's okay. He's mostly quiet and kinda shy, but polite. I know I have a big personality and can dominate the conversation, so I decide to give him a second shot. As the week leading up to date 2 goes on, I start to get apprehensive and tell myself not to sabotage this. I realize because I didn't want to stalk his profiles, I don't know his last name. So I text him and ask. He seems hesitant to tell me. He asks me why I need to know, so I respond jokingly that I typically ask before the first date, so I can know who my murderer is. But we're beyond that, and now I simply want to know who I'm dating. It takes him a while to respond, but he sends it finally, and then doesn't text again for a while. I keep my promise to myself, and don't social media stalk him. I tell some friends who start to seem hesitant about me meeting him again. Date 2. I show up at the restaurant, my choice, and it's pretty empty, so there is plenty of parking right up front. I park and wait. I see another car pull in, assuming it's him. He drives past all the open spots, my car included, which he knows because he walked me to it after date 1. He parks over at the side of the building, gets out, walks past my car, and texts that he saw me in the lot. It seemed a little awkward, but I ignored it. We enjoy the date and spend an hour and a half talking on and off until the restaurant closes. We discussed where in the city we live, general directions, and the fact that we've lived in those areas our entire lives. We also discussed social media, and he claims he has no social media account. This should have been a red flag since the app takes Facebook. Although the conversation was much better, I wasn't sure that I was ready to tell him I wanted to see him again, so I figured I would go home and think about it. He walks me to my car, but walks uncomfortably close behind me. I ignore this and turn to awkwardly hug him and say my goodbye. I don't open the car until he's walked away after a bit of a pause. I leave and get out on the road to head home. There aren't many cars in that area, as it's a heavily restaurant-laden area, and most are closing for the night. I get up to the main road I'd need to turn down to go the direction I live, and notice the car behind me gets into the turn lane. I was not going home because I actually wanted to make a quick stop at the grocery store to grab some items I needed for dinner the following night. The light turns red, and they sit extremely far back. I look in my mirror and realize it's him. No big deal, I'm sure it was just a coincidence that he's going this way. There are other stores this way as well. I refuse to become paranoid and overthink things. So I get up to the intersection the store is at and note he's still in the far lane. So I hop into the left-hand turn lane to get to the store and notice he cuts over 2 lanes to get behind me. That seemed odd, but maybe he didn't know where the entrance to this shopping center is. Still a really odd coincidence he'd be coming this way, especially without sending a text or something acknowledging he's behind me. I mean, we're the only cars on the road. I pull into the store and note he pulls in one row before I do. I decide to loop around the lot and pull back out onto the service road. I slowly drive back to the main road, noticing he gets out of his car and scans the parking lot. Not a casual scan like, is there a better parking spot, but a prolonged, where are you, scan. I get back out on the road and drive all the way to another out-of-the-way grocery store that I actually used to work at, knowing it's a safe place that will be on a more heavily populated end of town with some friends who will be there to make me feel safe. Needless to say, I haven't heard from him since, and I think he knows I know. It took me a while, but I found his social media. His first name was not what he told me. I dug through my texts with him until I found a screenshot he'd sent me of an Instagram page, which listed mutual followers. Another red flag I should have remembered, he obviously had an Insta. I start digging through the accounts listed until I find one that's not private and find his profile. This leads to the ability to reverse Google images until I find his Facebook, which has a different first name and a city that is nowhere near where he claimed he lived. Time to delete my dating profile again. It's really more of an in-person kind of explanation, he said, dodging the question with an awkward little smile. Then he suggested a dinner date. I hesitated. Normally, I have a rule about this sort of thing. I don't meet my online dates until we've had significantly more text and phone contact. Partly for safety reasons, because let's be honest, the internet can be a minefield of weirdos, but mostly because I've been on a lot of bad dates. Like the kind that make you question your life choices and wonder if staying single forever might be the better option. Still, something about this guy intrigued me. Maybe it was his honesty, or at least what I thought was honesty. He mentioned he was living in his friend's spare room because he'd hit a few speed bumps in life. I got that. I'm no stranger to speed bumps myself. In fact, if life were a road, mine would be under constant construction with a sign that read, "Expect delays." So I let myself dare to hope. Maybe, just maybe, I had found a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it was like to navigate life's ups and downs without a GPS. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the date. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words. And that's how I found myself sitting across from him at a dimly lit table in a cozy little restaurant, listening to him tell his story. About a year ago, I went out with some friends after work, he began, and I nodded encouragingly, signaling that he had my full attention. This seemed promising, relatable even. Who hasn't had a wild night out with friends? I met a girl at a bar, and we really hit it off, he continued, his tone casual. We ended up going home together. I smiled politely, already feeling a bit uneasy. Was this the kind of story you shared on a first date? But I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was a twist coming. He paused, taking a sip of water before dropping the bombshell. The next day, there's a cop on my doorstep. And yada, long story short, she didn't look 16. My stomach dropped. I froze mid-bite, my fork hovering in the air like I'd suddenly forgotten how to use it. I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. Did she look 30? Because you're 44, dude. So, he continued, as if he'd just confessed to accidentally missing a stop sign and not, sleeping with a minor. I have a felony on my record. I was put on probation, and my job fired me. At this point, my brain was in full red alert mode. My internal monologue was screaming, "Abort mission. Run. This is not a drill." But outwardly, I tried to keep my composure, nodding politely as though he'd just shared an unfortunate story about losing his luggage at the airport. "And then," he added with a dramatic sigh, "just to kick me when I'm down, my wife left me." I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "Your wife?" I repeated, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Yeah," he said, shaking his head like he couldn't fathom why she'd made such a decision. "She said she couldn't forgive me." He used air quotes for emphasis. "I mean, come on. I made one mistake. Everyone deserves a second chance, right?" I had no words. Literally none. What do you even say to that? Bummer was all I could manage, mostly because my brain had short-circuited and defaulted to autopilot. But he wasn't done yet. Oh no. He leaned back in his chair, clearly gearing up for Act 2 of his tragic life story. So there I was, out of work, with a felony on my record, and my mom and I trying to scrape by on her social security check. It wasn't enough to cover rent, so she started driving for Uber. There was a pause, a brief moment where I foolishly thought we might be transitioning to a different topic. But no. "That's how she caught COVID," he said, his voice growing somber. "And she died." At that moment, I felt like I was trapped in some kind of dark, absurdist comedy. The kind where everything keeps escalating until you're left questioning reality itself. I wanted to laugh, cry, and scream "what is happening?" all at the same time. Instead, I just nodded, my face frozen in what I hoped was a sympathetic expression. Meanwhile, my inner voice was losing its mind. Why did I agree to this date? Why didn't I stick to my rules? And most importantly, how do I politely escape this dinner without causing a scene? The rest of the evening was a blur. I think I muttered some variation of "that's tough" or "I'm so sorry" a dozen times, all while trying to inch closer to the end of the meal. He didn't seem to notice my discomfort, or if he did, he didn't care. He was too busy lamenting the unfairness of it all, completely unaware that this was, hands down, the worst date of my life. When the check finally arrived, I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly cried. I paid my half, thanked him for the lovely evening, and practically sprinted to my car. Once I was safely inside, I sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel and replaying the evening in my head. How had it gone so wrong so quickly? Needless to say, there was no second date. Looking back, I can almost laugh about it. Almost. It's the kind of story you tell your friends over drinks, and they react with a mix of horror and disbelief, saying things like, "Wait, he actually said that, and you're making this up, right?" But the truth is, that date taught me something important. It reminded me why I have my rules in the first place. They're not just about safety, they're about preserving my time, energy, and sanity. Because for every decent guy out there are at least 3 more who will sit across from you at a candlelit table and casually drop a felony confession into the conversation like it's no big deal. So here I am, still single and still hopeful that the right guy is out there somewhere. But after that night, my standards are higher than ever. And no felonies is officially at the top of the list. And that, dear reader, is why I'm still single. So it's 2011, and I am newly divorced. I am in my mid-20s and a single mother, so I decide to try out some dating sites. I start talking with this guy on one of the sites. We seem to have a lot in common, and he seems pretty normal. I decide to give him my phone number. We continue chatting via text and phone calls. Well, I suggest we go get some coffee to meet up. He states he doesn't drink coffee. Okay, I suggest some drinks at a bar. He doesn't drink alcohol. Okay, well he has a great idea. Let's go for a hike. I reluctantly agree. First red flag. He wants to go to this place called Batstow in South Jersey, which is a historic village with old abandoned buildings, hiking trails, and the home of the Jersey Devil. Great place for a first date, so I suggest we meet in the main parking lot, but no, he has a better idea. Let's meet at a train station nearby, and he'll drive us over because he knows of another entrance with better hiking trails. Next red flag. I again reluctantly agree, not wanting to be rude. So the day of the date comes, and for whatever dumb reason, I don't tell anyone I'm doing this. I think because I was embarrassed I was using a dating site, and I knew somewhere in the back of my mind my friends would have tried to talk me out of it. So I pull into the train station, and he's there in a late 90s Bronco. Okay, not so bad. We can't all afford newer cars. He gets out, and he's actually the guy from the pictures. Okay, internal sigh of relief. We get in the car, and start to head to this secret hiking trail entrance. We have a nice conversation on the way there. All seems good. We get there, and as we are getting out of the car I go to grab my phone. He says, "Oh no, just leave it here, I have mine." Red flag waving in my fucking face. Again being polite and not wanting to argue, I comply. I see the entrances, and one directs you towards the village and humanity. So I naturally suggest that one. He says no and points to this other trail that goes God knows where. I again, being the good girl that I am, say okay. Right before we go to set off, a bit of rebellion sets in, and I'm like, you know what, I should really have my phone with me. He starts to argue, and I'm like, no, I need it in case the babysitter calls about my son. He gives in and unlocks his car, and I grab my phone. 1 point for me. We set off down this trail side by side. We are talking, and everything seems okay. I start thinking, I was just overreacting before, all is good. Well, we get to a part in the trail where you can only go one by one. So I say, you go first and I'll follow. He says, oh no, you go, so in case you trip or anything I can grab you. I do that nervous giggle thing, and politely decline, saying how bad I am with following paths. He then insists I go first in a stern voice. Red flag with sirens. I stupidly comply. The trail is getting narrower by the second, and the woods are getting darker because of the amount of trees, brush, etc. We are now no longer talking, and the only sounds are the crunching of our footsteps. The panic starts setting in. I look back at him, and he's just got this scowl on his face and a dead look in his eyes. I try to smile at him, but nothing. So I stop, and I say, you know what, let's turn back. I liked it better when we could walk next to each other and talk. Still being polite, he says he wants to keep going this way. So I say no, I really want to go back the other way, and I start to do just that. As I go to walk past, he grabs my arm and blocks my path. I don't say anything and just casually grab my phone out of my pocket, not saying anything. He lets me go, saying fucking whatever, and we walk back towards the car in silence. Me with my phone in my hand the whole time. I amazingly did have signal. As we reach the clearing where the cars are parked, he looks at his watch and states he has to go now. He has somewhere to be. We were only on this date for less than an hour, but okay, I'm not complaining. For whatever dumb reason, I get back in his car. We drive in almost near silence the entire way back to my car, me with a death grip on my phone, and him looking miserable. He drops me off at my car and speeds away. I never hear from him again. In my naivety, I want to believe there was no chemistry between us. But let's be honest, when I decided to fuck politeness and grab my phone that day, I spoiled his dastardly plans. I have sex with men to steal their power. I felt sick to my stomach. At first she seemed like a normal, although quirky, but I'm quirky too, fellow college student. I was going to a small liberal arts college studded with orange trees in beautiful Southern California. I had been semi-involved with her before, after she came up to me sophomore year and said, I like your energy, let's be friends. But when I didn't go farther than making out, she lost interest. Then I got elected to a student government position, and for the first time in months she was in my room, saying, you were so inspiring, it was very sexy. Oh thanks. I never thought of myself as sexy. I was always more of a theater geek and bookworm. But I guess I had grown up a bit since my awkward, 100 pounds high school days. Why not just have sex? It's no big deal, right? I mean, see if it feels good. I couldn't say no to that. I mean, I could have, but how do you say no to that? She was cute. I liked her. So we did. It was okay. Maybe normal at first. But after having sex for a while, maybe I didn't come soon enough, she straddled me, began thrusting hard, and started screaming. Finish, finish, finish. It was disorienting. But I was new to sex, so I thought, maybe this is the way it is? But it just didn't sit well with me. Just felt like something that I thought was innocent or intimate just took a weird turn. But then maybe I was just a prude. I didn't know how to say no to her, so when she would come over we would have sex, but I never came with her again. Not until my friend invited me to a sexual harassment seminar. So I went. And the professor, she was very captivating, very powerful speaker. She basically said, if you're having sex with someone and you don't feel comfortable about it, that's rape. I was like, whoa. Because I didn't know it was okay to say no to someone you'd willingly had sex with. But it was really weirding me out that I would get back to my dorm room from class, and there she'd be, sitting at my desk in my room reading my journals. I know, I'm a guy and I write in a journal. Whatever, I've been writing my dreams and thoughts down since I was a kid. And it just didn't feel right. But she would pass it off like, we're having sex, you're not allowed to have any boundaries from me. So it was one of those days where I come home and she's there looking through my stuff. I'm fascinated by you. I just want to know all about your life. and she saw one of my books on Hermeticism, and she was just like, "Oh, are you studying this?" "I'm practicing a sect of Gnosticism, where I have sex with men to steal their power." "What?" "Yeah, there's a lot of energy in semen. Is that why you're not finishing when you're with me?" I lead her out of my room, but now I had gone to the sexual harassment seminar. I knew it was okay to say no to someone if you didn't feel comfortable having sex with them. But she wasn't having it. "Why not? It feels good, doesn't it?" "I feel good, don't I?" "Well, physically yes, but I just don't feel safe with you." "But at least we can just have sex." "No, I don't want to have sex with you anymore." "But why not if it feels good?" It went back and forth like that for a while. She just didn't seem to get it. She kept pushing, and I really thought I must be being crazy because here was a cute girl that wanted to have sex with me, that was challenging me about not having sex with her again. "Because I feel like you raped me." I don't know why I said that. Maybe because of the workshop, maybe because none of my other reasons or my feelings seemed to matter at all. It was like talking to a wall. "Can we at least be friends?" "No, I don't feel safe with you." About 6 weeks later, I woke up having sex with her, and finishing, which I had never done with her since the first time she was screaming at me to come. "What? Do you love me underscore 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 underscore?" "What?" "No. It's hard to jump into a conversation while the night and the world is swirling around you, and what might have been a bad dream is suddenly resolving itself into the real, and you're looking down on yourself that should have been sleeping alone, but is instead in bed with someone you thought you would never have to interact with again, and you're having some kind of zombie sex. But what if I was pregnant with your child? That's scary." I kicked her out of my room. I got pissed at my roommate for letting her in while I was asleep, but he didn't know any better. Anytime a girl wants to have sex with, you're a guy, right? That's a good thing. She kept coming to my room telling me she had something to show me. I kept just closing the door. It was like I wasn't allowed to have any boundaries. Like nothing I said mattered but what she wanted. But at the very least, as long as I was awake, I could tell her to get the fuck away from me. "Fine, have it your way." A few weeks later, everyone in our very small school was looking at me funny. The halls of my building were plastered with "No means no" posters. A kid I knew from one of my classes came up to me, fuming. "Rapist." "What?" I quickly found out that's what she had been trying to show me all those weeks. She had put a piece in the school paper saying that she had said no, that she had been raped. My friend, a feminist that I really trusted and believed was a good sounding board, told me that women were constantly being violated, that maybe I just didn't understand, but that I needed to talk to her and make things right. Not one person asked me what I experienced. Once the accusation was out, I was evil number one, unworthy of listening to, and I had nothing to say. Her whole thing, it was just so gross and disgusting. I didn't feel like sharing any of it. I just didn't have the energy to have to share something that most people were completely unwilling to even consider because, hey, this is a liberal arts college. The white male-dominant patriarchy is bad, and women are victims, and anything that happens, it's your fault, because you must have been horny and lost control of yourself. The school was unwilling to do anything. I asked them about judicial counsel. They literally told me that no matter what the chances were almost nil they would ever side with a male student because of the climate on campus. Anyhow, I finally asked her why she did it, why she created this whole shame campaign against me. I wanted to feel powerful. She said, "That is the creepiest thing anyone has ever done to me." P.S. Years later, at a reunion, her friends teased me about how they had gotten away with slander and sexual assault on me. They were proud of themselves. It was part of their empowerment. So, today as I was going for a coffee, I decided to check out a new cafe that just opened. As I go near the door, I am surprised and happy to see an ex-girlfriend of mine from when I was a kid. We stare at each other for a second, and then I see she mumbles something, and then comes towards me. I go in for the hug, and after we greet, she just says, "Do you remember what you've done to me?" I was baffled. We dated many, many years ago, and we never had issues of any kind. No major fights, no abuse, no toxicity. As a matter of fact, she left me because I would not commit, but remained on good terms for a while after, still hanging out, until she found a job abroad and left. At first I was scared shitless and immediately thought there was something strange. I asked to be more specific, but she wasn't telling. After a little chit-chat, she told me she was referring to the time me and a friend cleansed her house. It came back to me then. At the time we were stupid, edgy semi-goth kids, really into the weird and otherworldly stuff. After she complained about feeling her house was weird, a friend from our group offered to do some cleansing ritual, which he did while we were basically half drunk. According to her, when 7 years later she talked about this thing with other people, shit started to hit the fan. Like you could feel presence around the house, drops of temperature, all the good stuff. She was very vague, but apparently she believes some kind of ghost is now possessing her house. Something apparently unleashed after that thing we did, and she started telling about it to her friends, because nothing happened in the years prior. She then got back to England, but promptly came back here to escape from an abusive fiancé. At that point I was really nervous, and I excused myself. She hugged me, says now there is only Christ in her heart, and that we should really have a cup of coffee. This gave me really weird vibes, like weird cult stuff. I basically ran away terrified. Keep in mind, we split on good terms, very good. She looked after my dog while I was in England. As a masseuse, she took care of my bad back for months. She even introduced me to her new boyfriend, and we went out for dinner a couple of times as a group. There is no way she could have held animus against me. Hell, once abroad, she even offered to help find a job for me in the city she was currently living in. This was not a prank done to get back at me, and more so her eyes. She once was the light of the room, always laughing and cracking jokes. The person I found was sad, with very still eyes, not smiling, not anything. Like a completely different person. Hey everyone. I've been online dating for a while. I've had some interesting experiences, but none quite like this before. I just wanted to share with everyone what happened on this crazy date. About 2 weeks ago, I matched with this girl on Tinder. She was really cool and fun to talk to at first, and we hit it off pretty well. She was funny and had an interesting sense of humor. She was very attractive. Nothing struck me as weird or odd about her appearance, really. She had a lot of tattoos, which I liked a lot. There were certain comments that she would make at times that just seemed to be pretty dark and morbid. Another thing I found to be weird was that she insisted on driving. I figured that it was because she had a nice car and wanted to show it off. Nope. When she came to get me, she pulled up in a pretty beat-up, dark brown van. When I got in, I noticed an awful smell. It was very messy with trash and dirty clothes everywhere. I didn't want to say anything about it, so I just made casual conversation. We went out to eat, which was normal for the most part. After we left, she said that she wanted to drive me to this one spot she likes to go. She said that it was secluded and deep in the woods, so I figured it was just to make out or something like that. When we got there, she got out of the van and ran off sprinting. I was so confused and in shock at this point. I looked around for her for a second, but it was pretty dark and creepy, so I just decided to get back into the van and lock the doors. A few minutes later, I heard beating on the windows. It was really loud and scary. It did appear to be her, so I opened the door to let her in. She was completely naked at this point. I gave her a confused look, and she said that she just ran off like that to freak me out. She kept laughing, and then started kissing me. I went along with it, even though I was a little freaked out. I don't want to share graphic details, but she requested me to do some really weird and odd things that I didn't feel comfortable doing. She was rough and violent while we were messing around. I finally had to tell her to stop, and that I wasn't comfortable doing anymore. She told me to get out of the van. I asked if she could drive me back home, but instead she shoved me out and left me there and drove off. I still had my phone, so I decided to call the police. I let them know where I was, and that I felt unsafe. They shortly arrived, and I told them what happened. While I was taking to them, she came back in her van. They talked her to her and said that they were going to take her in. The next day I got a long message berating me for calling the cops on her. She said that what I did was uncalled for and childish. I haven't spoken to her since. I was fully embracing my hookup phase. College was the perfect time for it. No strings, no expectations, just fun. Tinder was my go-to for meeting people, low effort, high entertainment value. Some matches were decent, others were total disasters. Then there was this guy, who became an entirely different kind of story. We matched on a random Tuesday, and after the usual exchange of flirty messages and a few decent jokes on his part, he asked me to meet up at a popular bar in our college town for bingo night. It sounded fun and casual, something different from the usual coffee shop meetups or awkward attempts at Netflix and chill. Plus, bingo at this bar wasn't your typical quiet evening with retirees. It was loud, chaotic, and full of students who used every wrong answer as an excuse to drink. When I got to the bar, I spotted him immediately. He was good-looking, I'll give him that. Nice smile, decent hair, a little shorter than I expected, but not enough to matter. He waved me over, and we grabbed drinks before finding a table. The night started off well enough. We laughed about the ridiculousness of bingo night, bonded over how neither of us actually knew the rules, and made fun of the guy next to us who was way too serious about his bingo strategy. By the end of the night, I'd had just enough drinks to think bringing him back to my place was a good idea. You know how it goes. When you're in the moment, everything seems like a great idea. So we stumbled back to my apartment, where my roommates were already used to my questionable late-night decisions. Things didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. Let's just say the chemistry we had at the bar didn't quite translate once we were back at my place. It was awkward, clunky, and not at all what I'd envisioned. But hey, not every hookup is a home run. I figured we'd sleep it off, exchange a polite goodbye in the morning, and never speak again. That's how these things worked, right? Wrong. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes wafting through the apartment. My roommate, bless her, had a habit of whipping up breakfast for the house after a night out. Normally, it was a great way to start the day. Today, though, I had a different issue. He was still there. At first, I thought, okay, no big deal. He's probably just groggy. Give him some time. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that this guy had no intention of leaving anytime soon. I tried dropping hints, mentioning how busy my day was, casually putting on my shoes like I was about to head out, but he wasn't picking up on any of it. Instead, he sprawled out on my couch like he owned the place, chatting with my roommates, and even asking if he could grab a plate of pancakes. I was mortified. The awkwardness was unbearable. I'm not great at confrontation, so I kept smiling through gritted teeth, hoping he'd magically figure out that he wasn't supposed to still be here. But no, this guy was oblivious, or maybe just incredibly stubborn. Either way, I was at my wit's end. That's when my roommate stepped in. She was in the kitchen flipping pancakes when she looked over at me, raised an eyebrow, and mouthed, "Do you need help?" I gave her a tiny nod, hoping she'd have some brilliant plan to get him out of there. Turns out, her plan was far more direct than I expected. Without missing a beat, she grabbed a stack of the ugliest pancakes from the pile, the ones that had burned edges or had fallen apart mid-flip, and marched into the living room. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there holding the pancakes like she was about to serve him breakfast. Then, out of nowhere, she started throwing them at him. Yes, throwing pancakes. "Time to go," she shouted, pelting him with pancakes like she was in some sort of breakfast-themed food fight. At first, he looked completely stunned. A piece of pancake hit him square in the chest, and he just sat there blinking, like he couldn't believe this was happening. "What are you doing?" he finally sputtered, brushing crumbs off his shirt. "What does it look like?" My roommate shot back, hurling another pancake his way. "You need to leave." Now, I was frozen, caught somewhere between horror and hysterical laughter. This was not how I'd envisioned the morning going, but I couldn't deny it was effective. With each pancake that landed, he looked more flustered. "I was just hanging out," he said defensively, ducking as another pancake flew past his head. "Hanging out's over," she said, grabbing one last pancake and tossing it for good measure. "Take the hint, buddy." Finally, he stood up, muttering something under his breath about how crazy we were. He grabbed his shoes, glared at me like I'd betrayed him, and shuffled out the door, still brushing pancake crumbs off his clothes. As soon as the door shut, my roommate and I burst out laughing. It was the kind of uncontrollable, tears streaming down your face laughter that you only get after something truly absurd happens. "Did you just throw pancakes at him?" I asked, gasping for air. "Yup," she said, completely unbothered. "Sometimes, food is the only language people understand." She wasn't wrong. As over-the-top as her approach had been, it worked. The guy was gone, and the apartment finally felt like ours again. We sat down at the kitchen table, splitting the remaining, non-ugly pancakes, and spent the rest of the morning laughing about what had just happened. Looking back, it's one of my favorite college memories. Sure, the hookup itself was a bust, and I spent the next few days avoiding that guy around campus, but the story it gave me was priceless. To this day, whenever I smell pancakes, I think about my roommate standing in the living room, hurling food at some random Tinder guy who overstayed his welcome. I've had my fair share of wild experiences. I can share more if people are interested, but this story in particular is about the killer in the making I dated my sophomore year of high school. I didn't date him by choice. In fact, I already had a boyfriend who I loved very much. I had started dating him in May. He graduated, and I continued high school the next year. That's when this creep took an interest in me. I was never pretty at popular, but this year I had decided to put in some effort. I dressed nice, wore makeup, and out contacts in instead of wearing my glasses. That's when a fairly popular boy noticed me. He started chatting with me and eventually asked me to homecoming. I was flattered, but of course I said no, since I was very happy with my boyfriend. Well, he didn't take too kindly to being rejected. He proceeded to pull out a knife, one of 3 he carried with him daily, and told me that I had to break up with my boyfriend and go out with him, or he'd kill my boyfriend, my family, and eventually me. I was terrified, so I did as he said. I broke up with my boyfriend on the phone, and of course I couldn't tell him why. He got upset and hung up the phone. Now that I was single, the creep got happier. He stopped threatening me and treated me like a girlfriend. He was pretty nice to me, but I knew if I tried to leave or anything, he'd hurt me. If I did something he didn't like, the same. I became afraid to go to school. I had to do my makeup right, I couldn't wear my glasses, I had to dress girly and pretty. We went to homecoming in matching colors, and it was hard to tell from the outside how fucked up things were. I thought maybe I could do this, and it would be okay. Until I got a strange text. A number I didn't know texted me, and told me to tell my boyfriend, the creep, that if he didn't pay extra for the knife he was trying to buy, he'd kill me with it. That was it. I knew I had to get out. I ran to a teacher I trusted, and she helped me break up with him in a crowded hallway. He cursed, punched a locker so hard he dented it, then stormed off. I thought it was over, but it was far from it. He started to post threats on social media. I went to the principal about it as I started to fear for my life. But since they weren't very specific, she said there wasn't anything she could do. So I went on in fear for weeks until he posted a very specific death threat. There was no argument that it was meant for me. I went back to the principal, and the police got involved. 2 men were assigned to escort me to classes and protect me while I was at school, and they figured out what to do with the creep. It was several weeks before they took action. His punishment? A 40-day suspension. That's it. But at least for those 40 days, I could breathe. Now it was over. Except, a few days after his suspension, I was in the bathroom by the cafeteria. I was the only one there until another girl walked in. She stood next to me and told me that I shouldn't have said anything, that I was lucky for him to pick me. She started getting angry and calling me a bitch. Turned out, she practically worshipped this guy and was jealous of me. Suddenly, she pulled out a knife of her own and lunged at me. I managed to mostly dodge her attack, but she did manage to stab me in the shoulder. I freaked and I bolted away back to my friends, clutching my bleeding shoulder. They tried to ask what happened, but I couldn't stop crying long enough to tell them. She moved to the other side of the country before I could take action against her. With that, it really was over. The creep moved too, so he could have a fresh start, I guess. I went on with my life. This happened almost 3 years ago now, but I still have nightmares. I'm afraid someday he's going to come back and find me, and finish what he started. When I hear someone say his name, even if they aren't talking about him, I freak. If I see someone who reminds me of him even a little, I run. It seriously fucked me up. I don't know how to stop being scared. At least I made it out alive. To make a long story sort of short, when I was in 8th grade, I started to date a guy named Danny, who was a junior in high school. He was completely possessive/obsessive to new levels I hadn't seen before. I threatened to file a restraining order many times, but always fell right back into his gaslighting mind games. After a while of dating someone who was emotionally abusive, demeaning, and damaging, I decided to end the relationship. I had a new love interest named Steven. He was also a junior. Danny was stalking me our whole relationship. Anytime I went out with a friend, he would be somewhere watching me and texting me at the same time. I see you're wearing a skirt, trying to get fucked, you slut, is just one of the examples of the things he would say to me. He would call over and over again, leaving strange voicemails on my phone and my house phone. It was summer of 2006. My mom was genuinely concerned because of the voicemails and seeing him outside my house all the time. One night my best friend at the time, Kelly, and I were all drinking beers behind the mall parking lot as we often did. It was me, my friend Kelly, and 3 of Steven's friends. Kelly had a huge crush on one of Steven's friends, Sean. It was our routine for the summer to hang with this crew, and I really liked Steven. We were all pretty close and would always buy a 30-pack of Coors Light, or a cube, as we called it, and drank behind the mall. It was a great night, and Steven and I were making out, laughing and having fun. Danny was texting me the whole night from different numbers. I showed Steven and friends, and they were laughing, calling him weird, and telling me not to worry about him. They assured me they had my back. Every single night, one of the guys would make sure I got home safely, because it got to the point Danny was calling all of their phones Oswell, making threats, etc. They weren't afraid of him at all and threatened to jump him if he came around. This last night was the final straw. We were all pretty drunk, so my guard was down. We were listening to music and Danny kept calling me. I blocked his number and he just kept calling and messaging me from different numbers. My mom called me and asked me if everything was alright because Danny called the house phone 100 times and he's leaving weird voicemails begging for me to answer. He was making strange bribes, also said he wanted to sit down at Wendy's with me and see me one last time. I think you should come home soon, my mom said nervously. I told my friends and I was getting worried and I was honestly scared Danny was going to show up and then I had no idea what he was going to do. I could sense something bad was going to happen. He was absolutely unhinged at this point. He was sickly obsessed with me, especially fixated on my past partners, and one of the most controlling people I've ever met. His abuse was horrible. He knew I was with Steven and friends, and that infuriated him. He would write messages putting me down and calling me a slut for being with Steve. Then would text me how much he loved me and that we can't break up. He would threaten to hurt me, and especially Steven. As we finished our beers for the night, everyone went their separate ways to walk home. Steve and I were walking home together because we lived over that catwalk and a few blocks away from one another. I actually wanted to walk Steve home first because I didn't want Danny to hurt him like he kept threatening he was going to do. I had enough of this fucking guy, and his stalking was beyond unsettling. Steve and I drunkenly walked down the block talking and laughing. As we're walking, we see a hooded guy walking towards us fastly. I knew it was him right away. My heart started pounding, and I knew that walk. It was fucking Danny. He came up and tried to punch Steve, and Steve ducked, and I put myself in front / on top of S to block Danny's punches. They were saying shit to each other back and forth, and I literally snapped. Danny was calling me names and telling me to come with him. I threw my purse on the ground and lunged at Danny like a drunken wrestler. I threw him to the ground and screamed in his face, "It's over. Do you get it, you fucking idiot? Don't you dare touch him or me. I've had enough." Tears were rolling down my face out of anger. I pleaded and begged him to leave me alone and let me be free of him. I got up, grabbed my bag, and Steve and I continued to walk. Danny was walking beside us at this point. He was walking with us, crying and blurting out weird things, like weird rants about our relationship, etc. His walk and stare was so fucking unsettling. He was walking at our pace, and every time we walked faster, he would also walk faster. We were walking on the sidewalk, and Danny was walking on the street. He then asked Steve, "Are you going to fuck her on her period? Did you even know she has her period right now? She has it for at least 4 more days. She gets it every month around the 5th, until about the 11th inch," he said, leaning and smiling to see what Steve would do. He was also calling me a slut and demanding me to look at him, which is why I kept my head down. I kept telling Steve and myself to disengage from Danny. Steve ignores him, but throws out a few insults. Steve tells Danny he's acting like a psycho and to fuck off. I held Steve's hand and continued looking down as I walked. The fact he was telling Steve my menstrual cycle, asking questions with a maniacal smile, made me sick. He had a dark tone and sounded like a hyperactive serial killer. After Steve and I stopped answering him, Danny laughed and he ran back into his car and drove away. We got ourselves together and Steve was saying that he thinks he will confront us again before we get to our houses. We continued walking on the dark roads and over the catwalk, which is creepy in itself. We were both hypervigilant. Every car I heard or saw headlights, I would gasp and hide. As we got to Steve's house, he gave me a kiss goodnight, and I headed for the 6-minute walk ahead. The wind was howling, and it was dark. I heard some noises coming from the bush next to me. I figured it was just a skunk or an animal, or at least I was hoping that it was, and I'm irrationally afraid of skunks, just a side note. The wind was also howling, so I thought maybe it was the wind. I hurried past the bushes. As I was walking, I heard someone singing in a demonic voice the lyrics to the song "Make Damn Sure" by Taking Back Sunday. It was the part, "I'm gonna make damn sure that you can't ever leave. No, you won't ever get too far from me, you won't ever get too far." He was repeating it hunched in the bushes. I started to run and scream. He grabbed me from behind, and I remember the chills I had when I felt him grab me. He was waiting by Steven's house as we were walking home. He must have drove over there. Fucking creep. He knew which route we were taking, and how long it would take us to get to his hiding place. Danny started saying, "I watched you kiss Steve and walk him to his door." He was saying it in my ear. I became enraged and started hitting him with my bag, punching and screaming. "I want you to leave me alone. Please, Danny, I'm begging you. I'm going to file a restraining order on you. As I screamed, my eyes were filled with tears again from fear and the trauma I endured with this guy. I managed to get his fucking hands off of me and ran like hell to my house. I heard him yelling stuff at me, but I just kept running off pure adrenaline. I turned around when I got to my house and was just relieved he wasn't behind me. I hate hearing that song to this day and hate the disrespect I dealt with because of this asshole. He drove outside my house that night a few times. He continued to call and leave messages for a couple more weeks, but I never answered and moved on with my life. Haven't seen him since that night and never want to again. Glad to not be living in my hometown. Please protect yourself and remember you don't have to be abused, and you are worth more than a partner who is toxic and manipulative/controlling. Stay safe, ladies, and stay away from the Dannys of the world. I left out details of Danny's abuse towards me because I just don't feel comfortable sharing some of the things he's done and put me through. I had tried post this elsewhere, but was directed to bring my experience here. Thanks for reading ahead of time. A couple of years ago, I used to serve tables at a shitty steak joint in one of the Carolinas. I met a gentleman while working one Friday night. He had been sitting at the bar and eyeing me all evening. I'm a 20-something-year-old female. He was a good-looking older guy, so of course I strike up a conversation with him. There was something not quite right with him, but I couldn't exactly put my finger on it during the few hours he was there, talking to me as I ran drinks back and forth from the bar to my tables. He smiled a lot, but the smiles felt empty, and his eyes never crinkled like they do when someone genuinely smiles. At any rate, he asked to meet up with me for a beer or two the following night after I got off of work. Despite the little blinking warning light in my head, I agreed. I end up meeting up with him the next night at a local bar that I frequented. He has a beer waiting for me when I walk up, which made me immediately uneasy. Not trying to be rude, I told him that it had been a rough day and that I was going to go for something a little stronger. So I go order myself a whiskey sour and come back to where he was sitting. The little patio area outside of the bar was packed. He had managed to wrangle the little bench in the very back for us, so I had no choice but to sit as far as I could on the other end of the bench from him, so that I didn't have to touch him. He seemed to notice that I was intentionally trying not to touch him and could keep moving closer. He kept doing the man-spreading thing so that his leg would graze mine. I kept my body facing forward and not towards him, cradling my drink in towards my chest and a cigarette in my hand on his side. I was hoping that he'd get that I was sending obvious "don't touch me" signals, but nope. So we start talking. Everything's fairly normal. Maybe half an hour goes by. He gets up to get another beer. He's gone for a while. The bar was busy. Comes back with 2 more beers. Says the second one is mine, even though I didn't even touch the first one. Told him that I'm good, still nursing the whiskey sour. I wanted to get silly, but not near this dude. Out of absolutely nowhere, he tells me, sometimes I have really bad anger problems. I'm kind of an asshole and quite frankly don't care if I offend this guy at this point. So I respond, so that's what's wrong with you. To this he kind of cracks and gets real quiet. We're sitting there in uncomfortable silence and he breaks it by saying, "I can't believe you would say that to me." I apologize, saying that I'm in a bad mood. I probably need to just go home, blah blah blah. He then begins to tell me that I can't take back what I said, that he just wants to love me and I won't let him. That how is he supposed to spend his life with me if I insult him? That he knows I'm sleeping with other men. How can I handle being a whore? I'm slack-jaw shocked at this, completely confused. I try to diffuse the situation a little by saying, "Look, I didn't mean to offend you, but I've got to leave now, and I don't think it's a good idea for us to go on a second date." He gets quiet again, stands up, punches the fence that runs along the bench and separates the patio from the street really hard, and disappears inside. I just kind of keep sitting there because people are staring at me. I smile, light up a cigarette, and keep hoping he's paid up and leaving. Nope. He comes back out and begins shouting about how I broke his heart. He then goes to say that how dare I try to use him for his money. I'm kind of just watching him freak out, but on the inside, I'm actually terrified that this dude is going to hit me. I stand up, reach into my clutch and pull out $10, give it to him and thank him for the beers I didn't drink, and then hightailed it to the bathroom. Stalling for 15 minutes. I decide maybe that's enough time for him to have gone away. So I creep back outside and look around. He's not there. I go up to the bouncers. I'm very close with them from having been a regular at this bar, and ask them if the guy had left. They told me that they had to kick him out as soon as I left for the bathroom because he had started following me. They also told me that as they were dragging him out, he threatened to stab me for being a two-timing bitch. Needless to say, I didn't feel comfortable walking the 20 minutes to my house, so I stayed at the bar for a few more hours and called up a close male friend to walk me home, just in case.